My sister pushed me down the stairs, called it a prank, and now my parents threaten to disinherit me for pressing charges. I'm 28, and right now, I'm 4 months pregnant. My husband, Daniel, and I had been trying to have a baby for the past 2 years, and let me tell you, there were moments when we thought it might never happen. Those years felt like an eternity. But then, just when we were starting to think it wasn't meant to be, we got the incredible news: I was finally pregnant. This baby means everything to us, especially after all the hurdles we've faced. We're absolutely over the moon, knowing that soon, we'll get to hold our first child in our arms. Because I've had miscarriages in the past, Daniel and I made a pact this time to be extra careful. For our own peace of mind, we decided not to share the news until we were confident the pregnancy was progressing well. It wasn't an easy decision, but we wanted to shield ourselves from the added pain of having to explain our loss to everyone if things went wrong again. As of last week, not even my parents or my younger sister, Rachel, knew I was expecting. It felt odd at times, keeping them in the dark, but I knew I needed this space to process everything in my own way. My family's always been the kind to celebrate absolutely everything: big milestones, tiny victories, you name it. And honestly, that's one of the things I love most about them. They've made every moment feel special, and over the years, we've built so many joyful memories together. But over the last few months, I've been a little distant when it comes to family gatherings. I needed some breathing room, especially since this pregnancy has been such an emotional ride. Then, just last week, Rachel got promoted at work, and she was thrilled. Rachel's had a tough time over the past year. She was supposed to get married, her dream wedding and all, but things went horribly wrong. The night before her big day, her fiancé cheated on her at his bachelor party with a coworker, no less. The next morning, instead of coming to her himself, he had one of his buddies deliver the news that he wasn't going through with the wedding. He didn't even have the decency to face her. The whole situation was humiliating, not just for Rachel but for our entire family. We'd put so much effort into planning that wedding, and it was supposed to be one of the happiest days of her life. But instead, it turned into a nightmare. Rachel was crushed, completely heartbroken. She'd been so hopeful about her future with this guy, only to have it all fall apart in the most gut-wrenching way possible. After that, Rachel threw herself into her career. I think it was her way of coping, a way to stay busy and keep her mind off the pain. She's always been ambitious, but after the wedding fiasco, she became laser-focused on work. So, when she got promoted, it was a huge deal for her, both personally and professionally. She decided to throw a party to celebrate and practically begged me to come. She said she hadn't seen me in ages and missed having me around. My parents were on my case about it too, saying how much it would mean to Rachel if I showed up. I didn't want to let her down, especially since I'd skipped a few family events recently, so I agreed. The thing is, I didn't want to take any attention away from Rachel on her big night. Showing up with my growing baby bump would have been a dead giveaway, and I didn't want the focus to shift away from her hard-earned accomplishment. This was her moment, and I wasn't about to steal the spotlight. But with my bump becoming more noticeable, it was getting tricky to hide. I decided to wear a long, flowy dress to help cover it up and even put on some shapewear to smooth things out as much as I could. I was determined to keep the night all about Rachel and her success. When I arrived at the party, things seemed to be going smoothly. No one appeared to suspect anything, and I felt a little more at ease knowing my efforts were paying off. My mom did mention that my face and arms looked a bit rounder than usual, but I was ready for that. I just laughed it off, joking that I'd been indulging in way too much food lately. Honestly, I was relieved they assumed I'd just put on some weight instead of figuring out the real reason. As the night wore on, though, I started to feel out of place. I'm not used to staying up late anymore, and the party seemed to drag on forever. My husband, Jack, arrived at the party straight from work, looking sharp in his button-down shirt and tie. He seemed to be enjoying himself, chatting with my dad and a few of my cousins. Every so often, he'd come over to check on me, making sure I was okay, and I was grateful for his attentiveness. Meanwhile, my sister, Hannah, was in her element. She and the rest of the family were living it up, taking shots, laughing loudly, and tearing up the makeshift dance floor in the backyard. Watching her smile and let loose, especially after everything she'd endured over the last couple of years, brought me genuine happiness. As much as I wanted to join in the fun, I wasn't feeling great. The combination of the heat, the fried appetizers, and the general excitement was starting to make me queasy. I quietly excused myself and slipped inside, looking for a quiet place to escape the noise. I found a comfy spot on the couch, tucked away in the living room, and sank into it with a sigh. All I could think about was how nice it would be to go home, kick off my shoes, stretch out on the bed, and lose myself in a good book on my Kindle. I must have closed my eyes for just a second, but when I opened them, Aunt Linda was suddenly sitting beside me, a glass of wine in her hand and a curious look on her face. She smiled and offered me the glass, but I shook my head with a polite no, thank you. I didn't want to go into details, and I hoped she'd leave it at that. But Linda wasn't one to let things slide. She studied me for a moment before saying, you've been glowing all night. Are you sure you're not? Her voice trailed off as she gave me a knowing look. I felt my stomach tighten, and I forced a laugh, waving off her suggestion. No, nothing like that, I said, trying to sound casual, but I could tell she wasn't convinced. Her eyes narrowed slightly as if piecing together a puzzle, and before I knew it, she leaned forward and whispered, "Wait a second. Are you pregnant?" Panic shot through me, but I managed to shake my head and mumble something vague. But then Linda reached out, resting her hand lightly on my stomach. Her face lit up with a mixture of surprise and delight. "Oh my goodness, sweetheart, you are pregnant," she exclaimed, pulling me into an enthusiastic hug before I could stop her. I felt my cheeks flush as I quickly whispered, "Please, Aunt Linda, don't say anything yet. I haven't told anyone. It's not the right time." She pulled back, her hands on my shoulders, and gave me a warm, almost motherly smile. "But why not? Everyone's here. This is the perfect moment to share such wonderful news," she said. I tried to reason with her, explaining that this was Hannah's night to shine and that I didn't want to take away from her celebration. But Linda waved off my concerns. "Oh, nonsense," she said cheerfully. "This is a family gathering, and everyone's going to be thrilled to hear this. Don't overthink it, darling." Before I could stop her, she got up and strode back outside, her excitement practically radiating off her. My heart sank as I watched her clap her hands and call for everyone's attention. "Listen up, everyone," Linda said, her voice cutting through the music and chatter. "I have some big news to share." She paused dramatically, then pointed straight at me with a grin. "Maggie's pregnant." The entire backyard went silent for a split second. Then, as if on cue, the crowd erupted in cheers, claps, and excited shouts. Before I could even process what had just happened, my family surged toward me, enveloping me in a whirlwind of hugs and congratulations. My mom was crying, her hands trembling as she cupped my face. "Oh, honey, this is the best news," she said through tears. My dad had his arms around both me and Jack, his voice thick with emotion as he told us how proud and happy he was. Relatives I hadn't even spoken to all night were suddenly hugging me, sharing their joy, and asking a million questions. Jack, who had been talking to one of my uncles, was caught off guard by the commotion but quickly joined in, accepting hugs and pats on the back. "Congratulations, Dad-to-be," someone shouted, and Jack just smiled, probably as overwhelmed as I was. But in the midst of all the chaos, my eyes found Hannah. She was standing off to the side, her expression carefully neutral as she sipped her wine. She wasn't part of the celebration, she wasn't hugging me or even looking my way. My heart sank as I realized how awkward and out of place she must have felt. I broke away from the crowd and walked over to her. "Hannah, I'm so sorry," I said softly. "I didn't want this to happen." Aunt Linda she wasn't supposed to say anything. Hannah took a long breath, her eyes meeting mine for a moment before darting away. "Why didn't you tell me before?" she asked, her voice calm but distant. "I wanted to," I explained. "I just wasn't ready yet. I planned to tell everyone in a couple of weeks when things felt right." She shook her head slightly, her lips pressing into a thin line. "Whatever," she said quietly. "I guess you got your big moment." Her words stung more than I expected. I reached out to her, trying to explain further, but she took another sip of her wine and walked away, leaving me standing there, guilt weighing heavily on my chest. The rest of the night was a blur. My family couldn't stop buzzing about the baby, showering me with advice, stories, and well-meaning tips about parenthood. But no matter how many kind words or congratulations I received, I couldn't shake the sinking feeling that I'd inadvertently overshadowed Hannah's big night, the one night that was supposed to be hers. Hannah kept glaring at me from across the room, her eyes filled with resentment, as if everything that had happened was entirely my fault. Her hostility only made the knot of guilt in my stomach tighten. I avoided her gaze, trying to focus on the family members still offering me advice about pregnancy, but the tension was impossible to ignore. At one point, I felt an urgent need to use the bathroom. I got up and headed toward the guest washroom, only to find it occupied. With my bladder practically bursting, I decided to use the bathroom in the main bedroom upstairs. After finally relieving myself, I opened the door to step out, only to find Hannah waiting right outside. Her expression was unreadable, but her slightly unsteady stance and the flush in her cheeks told me she'd had a bit too much to drink. I smiled awkwardly, sensing the tension between us, and tried to offer yet another apology. "Hannah, I'm really sorry about earlier. I never wanted." She cut me off with a dismissive scoff, rolling her eyes. "Are you even really pregnant?" she asked, her tone dripping with skepticism. I froze, instinctively placing a hand on my stomach. "Of course, I am," I said, my voice steady despite the sting of her accusation. "Why would I lie about something like that?" She shrugged, her words slurring slightly. "I just think it's weird. You tell Mom everything. You talk to her every day, but you didn't tell her about this?" Her persistence was starting to wear on me. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my frustration in check. "I've already explained, Hannah. I wanted to wait until the right moment. This wasn't how I planned to tell anyone." But instead of understanding, she delivered a cutting blow. "Maybe this pregnancy will end in miscarriage too. Just like the others." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I stared at her, stunned, as the air seemed to be sucked out of the room. "How could you say something like that?" I yelled, my voice shaking with a mix of hurt and fury. "That's cruel, even for you." Hannah crossed her arms, her expression a mixture of bitterness and defiance. "You stole my night," she snapped. "After everything I've been through, everything, you just had to make it all about you." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My voice trembled as I reminded her, "Hannah, I've been there for you through all of it. Every sleepless night, every tear you cried after Jason left you at the altar. I dropped everything to help you heal. And now, you're blaming me for something Aunt Linda did? I never wanted this to happen tonight." She didn't seem to hear me. Her anger was blinding her, and her words only grew sharper. "You just couldn't let me have one night to myself," she said, her voice rising. Feeling utterly drained, I shook my head and turned to leave. "I'm done with this," I said, needing to put distance between us. I started walking back toward the stairs, desperate for some space to calm down. But Hannah wasn't done. She followed close behind, her words chasing me like daggers. "Selfish, as always," she muttered. "You should have just stayed quiet for one night." I ignored her, focusing on getting back downstairs. But as I reached the top of the staircase, I felt a sudden, forceful shove from behind. My breath caught in my throat as I stumbled forward, my arms flailing to grab the railing. For a split second, I thought I'd regain my balance, but the momentum was too strong. My knees buckled, and before I knew it, I was falling. The world seemed to slow down as I tumbled down the stairs. Instinctively, I curled my arms around my stomach, desperate to protect my baby. The sharp edges of the stairs slammed against my body, and a searing pain shot through my wrists as I landed hard at the bottom. The pain was immediate and overwhelming, radiating through my arms and leaving me breathless. I cried out, the sound of my own voice barely registering through the haze of agony. The room around me spun, and all I could think about was whether my baby was okay. The commotion drew everyone's attention. In an instant, the party came to a screeching halt as my family rushed toward me. Jack was the first to reach me. His face was pale, his eyes wide with panic as he gently lifted me into his arms. "Maggie, are you okay?" "What happened?" he asked, his voice trembling. Through the pain, I managed to whisper, "She pushed me." Hannah pushed me. Gasps rippled through the room as all eyes turned to Hannah, who stood frozen at the top of the stairs. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with guilt. Jack's voice erupted in anger as he shouted at her, "How could you? How could you push her down the stairs? She's pregnant, for God's sake." My mom rushed up the stairs, grabbing Hannah by the shoulders. "Tell me it's not true," she pleaded. "Hannah, please. Tell me you didn't do this." Hannah's lip quivered as tears streamed down her face. She let out a shaky sob and nodded, barely able to speak. I didn't mean to. I was drunk. I didn't know what I was doing." My mom's hands dropped to her sides as the weight of Hannah's confession hit her. Meanwhile, the pain in my wrists and the fear for my baby became too much to bear. My vision blurred, and I felt myself slipping into unconsciousness as Jack's voice called out, "Someone call 911. The next thing I remembered was waking up in a hospital bed. The room was dimly lit, and Jack was asleep in a chair beside me, his head resting on his folded arms. My throat felt dry, and I croaked out his name. He stirred immediately, rushing to my side. "You're awake," he said softly, his voice filled with relief. He handed me a glass of water, helping me take small sips. "What happened?" I asked, my voice weak. Jack sat down, his face still etched with worry. "You passed out from the pain," he explained. "Your wrists are fractured. The doctors put them in casts, you'll need to wear them for about 6 weeks." "And the baby?" I whispered, my heart pounding. Jack reached for my hand, his eyes glistening with emotion. "The baby's okay," he said. "The doctors ran all the tests. You're both going to be fine." Relief washed over me, but it was quickly overshadowed by the memory of Hannah's actions. Tears welled up in my eyes as I thought about everything that had unfolded. The physical pain was one thing, but the emotional wound, caused by someone I loved so deeply, was something I wasn't sure I could ever heal from. My first question, once I regained some strength, was about the baby. Jack reassured me that the doctors had checked thoroughly and confirmed our child was safe. A wave of relief swept over me, and for a moment, the ache in my wrists and the weight on my heart lightened. Our baby was okay, that was all that mattered. Jack then began to fill me in on everything that had unfolded after my fall. The family, he explained, was furious with Hannah. Some had even wanted to have her arrested on the spot. However, since I was unconscious, the police could only take preliminary witness statements. They needed mine to move forward with any charges. Jack held my hands gently but firmly, his eyes full of resolve. "Maggie, I know she's your sister, but what she did was inexcusable," he said. "You have to report her. This wasn't just some mistake. She pushed you while you were pregnant. There's no excuse for that." I shook my head, still struggling to wrap my mind around what had happened. The physical pain in my wrists was one thing, but the emotional pain of knowing my sister had done something so reckless and harmful was almost unbearable. I can't believe she would do this to me," I whispered. Jack nodded but didn't let up. "I get it, Maggie. It's hard to believe. But you need to set aside your feelings for her and think about what could have happened, what she was willing to risk. For you. For our baby." I closed my eyes, overwhelmed. "I need to talk to her," I finally said. "I need to hear her side of the story. I need to understand why she did this." Jack hesitated but eventually handed me his phone. With trembling hands, I dialed Hannah's number. She answered on the third ring, her voice heavy with exhaustion. "Maggie?" "Why, Hannah?" I asked, my voice shaking with a mix of anger and disbelief. "Why would you do something like this?" There was a long pause on the other end before she finally sighed. "Honestly, Maggie, I'm just tired," she said, her voice carrying an edge of bitterness. "Tired of you always being the center of attention. You've got Jack. Now you're pregnant. Everything in your life is perfect. And last night? That was supposed to be my night. But as usual, you had to make it about you. With your stupid pregnancy announcement." I was stunned by her words, but before I could respond, she continued. And pushing you? That was just a harmless prank, she said defensively. I didn't even think you were really pregnant. I didn't mean for it to be such a big deal. My heart sank as her words registered. A prank? I repeated, disbelief thick in my voice. Hannah, I could have lost my baby. I could have lost my life. And you're calling it a prank? She scoffed, her tone growing colder. I've been through a lot, Maggie. My engagement fell apart, and everyone pities me. Then you show up, flaunting your perfect little life, rubbing your happiness in my face. It was too much. Maybe next time, you'll think twice before trying to overshadow me again. I was at a loss for words. She showed no remorse, no regret, just blame and bitterness. The sister I'd grown up with, the one I'd comforted and stood by during her darkest moments, was gone. All that remained was someone who resented me for things I couldn't control. Before I could respond, I heard my mother's voice on the line. Maggie, how are you feeling, sweetheart? She asked softly. I blinked in surprise. Mom? You're there? Yes, she admitted. Your dad and I stayed with Hannah last night. She's been so upset about everything. I couldn't help but scoff. You stayed with her? If you were so worried about me, why didn't you come to the hospital? Mom sighed, clearly trying to keep her tone calm. We wanted to, but Hannah needed us more last night. She was crying non-stop. She's not in her right state of mind, Maggie. She didn't mean to hurt you. It was just a stupid, drunk mistake. Her words only fueled my frustration. A mistake? I snapped. She pushed me down a flight of stairs. She hasn't even apologized, Mom. Why are you defending her? She's struggling, Maggie, Mom insisted. She's been through so much, and this isn't like her. You two are sisters. Fights happen, but family is family. It's not worth ruining her life over a broken wrist. A broken wrist? I repeated, incredulous. This isn't about my wrist, Mom. She could have killed me. She could have killed my baby. Mom's voice grew more pleading. We'll make sure this never happens again, Maggie. But filing charges? That's permanent. It could ruin her career, her entire future. Please, think about what you're doing. Her words hit me like a slap. So, what? I asked, my voice trembling with anger. I'm supposed to just forgive her and move on like nothing happened? Mom hesitated before delivering her final blow. If you go through with this, Maggie, your father and I will have no choice but to disinherit you. Think about what you're doing to this family. I froze, stunned by her threat. The silence hung heavy between us before I finally spoke. You've made your choice, Mom. Now I'm making mine. I ended the call and handed the phone back to Jack. My hands shook, but my resolve was clear. That was the moment I decided I couldn't let this go. Hannah needed to be held accountable. Later that day, I gave my statement to the police and officially pressed charges. Update 1. Hannah has been arrested. Jack and I have silenced our phones because my parents haven't stopped calling, begging me to drop the charges. Jack is furious, not just with Hannah, but with my parents for choosing to side with her after everything she did. On the bright side, Jack's family and our other relatives have been incredibly supportive. They've reached out with words of encouragement and have assured us we made the right decision. For the first time in days, I feel a sense of peace. After reading some of your comments, I realized something that sent a chill down my spine. If Hannah could push me down the stairs while I was pregnant, what's stopping her from posing a threat to my child in the future? I knew I couldn't take any chances. That's why I've started the process of filing for a restraining order against her. It's the only way I can ensure she stays far away from me and my family. Update 2. Hello, Reddit. A month has passed since my last update, and a lot has happened. My sister, who was charged with assault, has finally been sentenced. Thanks to the lawyer my parents hired for her, a top-notch one, might I add, she managed to avoid jail time. The court gave her probation since it was her first offense. She's been ordered to pay for my medical bills, attend 6 months of mandatory counseling, and regularly check in with a probation officer. As for my parents, they're still furious with me, though they've backed off from confronting me directly. It seems the backlash they've received from the rest of the family has humbled them a bit. I've been very open with everyone about how my parents pressured me to protect Hannah by not pressing charges. Relatives from both my side and Newton's have been calling them out for their behavior. My mom keeps insisting that Hannah is struggling with her mental health, but nobody is buying that as an excuse for what she did. For what it's worth, I genuinely hope my parents follow through on their promise to get Hannah the help she needs. If therapy or medication can help her, I'm all for it. But that doesn't mean I'm ready to forgive or forget what she did. Following her sentencing, I officially applied for a restraining order. I refused to let her come anywhere near me or my family again. For those of you asking if there were warning signs about Hannah, honestly, I don't know how to answer that. Growing up, we had our fair share of arguments like any siblings do, but I never imagined she harbored this much resentment toward me. As her older sister, I always loved her and thought we had a decent bond. That's why her actions shocked me to the core. I guess it's true what they say, sometimes the people closest to us are the ones who betray us the worst. Update 3. It's been 5 months since my last update. In that time, Newton and I have had zero contact with Hannah or my parents. 5 days ago, I gave birth to a beautiful baby boy. We've since been discharged from the hospital and are settling into life as new parents. Our days are a blur of diaper changes, feedings, and stolen moments of sleep, but we couldn't be happier. Last night, just as Newton and I were about to sit down for dinner, there was a knock at the door. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I was surprised when I opened it and found my mother standing there. I froze. For a moment, I couldn't even process what I was seeing. "Mom?" I asked cautiously. "What are you doing here?" Newton came up behind me, instinctively placing himself between us. He looked just as confused as I felt. My mother's face lit up with excitement, as if the past 5 months hadn't happened. "Oh, Maggie, I heard from the family that you'd had the baby. I just had to come see my grandson," she said, practically gushing. "Your father will be here any minute with wine and gifts. We're so thrilled to finally be grandparents." I exchanged a look with Newton, both of us completely taken aback. Was she serious? Did she really think she could just show up unannounced, acting like everything was fine? I took a deep breath, trying to keep my cool. "Mom, we haven't spoken in months," I reminded her. "You sided with Hannah after everything she did to me. And now you're here, pretending like none of that ever happened?" Newton, never one to mince words, stepped in. "You lost the right to be grandparents the moment you chose not to be good parents to Maggie first," he said firmly. "You protected a monster instead of your own daughter. That's unforgivable." My mother's smile faltered, and her expression hardened. "I did what I had to do," she snapped. "That's all in the past now. You can't keep us from our grandchild. It's not fair." Newton didn't back down. "This is our son," he said. "It's our decision who gets to be in his life. And frankly, neither of us feels comfortable having you around." My mother's tone shifted to one of justification. "Hannah was diagnosed with depression, Maggie. She wasn't in her right mind. She feels terrible about what she did and is working on getting better. With the baby here, we can finally move on and be a happy family again." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You think we can just sweep everything under the rug?" I asked, my voice shaking with anger. "Things will never go back to the way they were." I had reached my breaking point. "Mom, I think it's best if you leave," I said, my voice firm despite the tears threatening to spill. "I don't want to argue anymore. Just go." Before she could respond, my father pulled into the driveway, stepping out of the car with a giant teddy bear and a basket of gifts. I felt a wave of exhaustion wash over me. I didn't have the energy to keep fighting. Thankfully, Newton took over. "Maggie, go inside and rest." "I'll handle this," he said gently. I nodded and walked back into the house, leaving him to deal with my parents. From behind the door, I could hear their voices rise as the argument escalated. "You have no right to keep us from our grandchild," my father yelled. Newton's voice was steady but firm. "If you don't leave, I'll call the police." My father tried to reason with him, insisting on leaving the gifts behind as some kind of peace offering, but Newton wasn't having it. "We don't want your gifts," he said. "And if you ever show up here again, we'll get a restraining order against you too." The shouting eventually died down, and I heard their car pull away. When Newton came back inside, he was visibly shaken but resolute. "Today, we've decided to install security cameras around the house. It's a precaution I never thought we'd need, but after everything that's happened, we can't take any chances. I hope to never see my parents again."